I have promised to devote some of my lectures to the subject of constitutional history. In redemption of that promise, I propose to take the subject on hand now. And as it seems to me that an intelligent appreciation of our English Constitution is dependent upon a proper understanding of the formation of English social life, an inquiry into the early history of that social life will, as I hope to show, not be without value. As Mr. Freeman has said in his admirable work on the Norman Conquest, that event is important, not as the beginning of English history, but as Mr. Freeman has said in his admirable work on the Norman Conquest, that event is important, not as the beginning of English history, but as its chief turning point. It brought with it a most extensive foreign infusion, which affected our blood, our language, our laws, our arts. Still, it was only an infusion. The older and stronger elements still survived and in the long run made good their supremacy. What these older and stronger elements were, it will be my business to explain, and what was the nature of the infusion I speak of, I shall also explain, for this is clear, that if the earlier English history is important to the right understanding of the conquest, it is no less important to exhibit what it was these Norman conquerors brought with them, and to do that properly I must put before you the social life of the men whose infusion of language, laws, and arts so materially affected the condition of things in the country into which they came and in which they settled. William the Conqueror, as we know, claimed to reign as the lawful successor of the kings of the English who reigned before him. He claimed to inherit their rights and professed to govern according to their laws. But he brought with him customs and laws that in time altered the aspect of the earlier English customs and laws, and therefore if, on the one hand, I point out some of the leading features of the earlier English life, on the other hand, it will be my business to account for the source from which these Norman customs and laws flowed. And here just let me state what the character of the Norman conquest was, and again I cite Mr. Freeman. It was much less than a national migration. It was much more than a mere change of frontier or of dynasty. It was not such a change as when the first English conquerors slew, expelled, or enslaved the whole nation of the vanquished Britons, nor was it such a change as when Goths or Burgundians sat down as a ruling people, preserving their own language and their own law, and leaving the language and laws of Rome to the vanquished Romans. What it did was this. It brought with it not only a new dynasty and a new nobility. It did not expel or transplant the English nation or any part of it, but gradually deprived the leading men and families of England of their lands and offices, and thrust them down into a secondary position under alien intruders. It did not at once sweep away the old laws and liberties of the land, but it at once changed the manner and spirit of their administration, and it opened the way for endless later changes in the laws themselves. It did not abolish the English language, but brought in a new language by its side, which for a while supplanted it as the language of polite intercourse, and which did not yield to the surviving elder tongue till it had affected it by the largest infusion that the vocabulary of one European tongue ever received from another. The most important of the formal changes in legislation, in language, in the system of government, and in the tenure of land were no immediate consequences of the conquest, no direct innovations of the reign of William. They were, no doubt, the developments of later times, when the Norman as well as the Englishman found himself under the yoke of a foreign master. But the reign of William paved the way for all the later changes that were to come, and the immediate changes which he himself wrought were, after all, great and weighty. Yet the Norman customs and law work a change of a most remarkable and decided character, and that is why I propose to exhibit this change in its proper detail. What I wish to show and what I shall endeavor to show is the character and conditions of life that the Norman invaders of England introduced. For as Mr. William Morris, in the first of his series of lectures, says, William brought with him an army of feudal vassals. Owing military service to him, he created a baronage. Then the struggle of monarchical bureaucracy began. And in the contest between the court and the church was in the earlier period usually on the popular side. My business, therefore, is to point out the progressive changes by which this feudal vassalage was created, how the church acquired the power, which doubtless it did acquire, of influencing the struggles of the people for freedom, and how the feudal institutions for a considerable time displaced the earlier English institutions. To do this properly, I must, as I have said, go back to a much earlier period of history than the Norman conquest. I must show you what the state of Europe was at the fall of the Roman Empire. What was the result of the establishment of the Franks in certain parts of Europe? And what was the influence of Frankish laws and customs upon the Norman invaders of France when, by the peace of Clair-on-Epte, AD 912, Rolf became the vassal of King Charles, receiving from him in pure allodial possession, in allod et infundo, the lands granted to him, and though not bearing the title of king, yet holding as king the monarchy of the Norman land. The subject in hand is an important one in respect of time and in respect of territory. It takes us back 13 centuries. It covers a large extent of ground, Italy and Gaul, i.e. France, as well as our own land. It is important also in another respect because the history of the rise and progress of modern European social life is the history of civilization.